Dianne Calvi is going to talk to us about ending hunger and building climate resilience through economic inclusion and digital solutions, evidence and lessons from rural Africa. Since 2010, Calvi has been president and CEO of Village Enterprise, dedicated to eradicating rural poverty in Africa. She has increased the breadth and depth of the organization's impact by focusing on strategic partnerships, innovation, and technology, rigorous monitoring and evaluation, and building a highly qualified Africa team. To date, Village Enterprises helped train 354,000 people to start 111,000 businesses and bring 2 million people out of extreme poverty. These are incredibly impressive numbers. Dianne, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. And can everyone hear me? Good. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and actually fortuitous because the question that was asked in the last presentation is, how will large African countries grow? And I believe that we have one of the answers to that question. So I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation, you'll feel a little bit more optimistic about Africa. Village Enterprise, as Thomas mentioned, is an NGO, and we work in rural Africa, and we equip people to start small businesses and savings groups. And we believe that entrepreneurship, innovation, and collective action can drive poverty alleviation. Before I speak about what we do, I'd like to open with something that I believe is even more fundamental. Let's see. In 2018, I met Salome in the Bidi Bidi refugee camp in northern Uganda. Salome is a mother of 6, and she was forced to flee her home in South Sudan with her children when war broke out. She had to walk for weeks with her children, carrying her 1-year-old on her back, not knowing where their next meal would come from or where they would even find water. I'm a mother, and I just can't imagine the feelings that Salome must have felt during that long walk. When she arrived at the Bidi Bidi camp, she was given some oil, a bag of rice, a jerry can for water, a plastic wash basin, and a tent. She told me that she had lost all hope for her future and the future of her children. I believe that hope is a fundamental force in transforming our lives. Each and every one of us hopes for something each day. We can all relate to hope. Hope is part of the human condition. Nobel Prize-winning economist Esther Duflo asked the question, is there something fundamentally different about life under extreme poverty? What would it do to you to have no way out? What would it do to you to live in an area with no money, very little food, no education, no medical care, and perhaps even an oppressive force that keeps you in extreme poverty? Extreme poverty extinguishes hope. Nelson Mandela said that overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity, it's an act of justice. And while poverty persists, there can be no true freedom. Historically, we've seen tremendous progress eradicating extreme poverty. In just the past 4 decades, the percentage of people living in extreme poverty worldwide has declined from 40% to just over 8%. And although there are still over 500 million people living in extreme poverty in Africa, there was still significant progress during that time in Africa, with the percentage of people in extreme poverty dropping from 60% in 1990 to around 35% in 2022. Yet today, climate change, conflict, and mass displacement are reversing those gains. We're facing an unprecedented crisis in international development. Foreign aid budgets are shrinking, hunger is increasing, and as we heard in the last presentation, global inequality is widening. Nowhere are those realities more deeply felt than in rural Africa, where families struggle to grow food, access clean water, and basic health care. And the consequences are very real. At Village Enterprise, we see them every day. When the rains fail, so do the harvests. Parents have to cut trees for charcoal just to buy food to feed their children. And land that once sustained life becomes barren, and a vicious hunger cycle begins. As food runs out, children suffer from malnutrition. They fall behind in school, not for a lack of intelligence, but because they lack the energy and the nutrition to learn. Mothers are forced to walk miles to find food or medicine, oftentimes too late. And while most of the world has a smartphone, people we work with don't. They're lucky to have just a basic flip phone. And without access to digital services, people are cut off from weather forecasts, agricultural advice, and markets that could help them provide for their families. These aren't separate crises, they feed one another. Climate shocks drive hunger, hunger erodes learning and productivity, and the lack of opportunity and resources prevents self-reliance. Together, they form a self-reinforcing poverty trap. This may seem like an insurmountable problem, but it's not. To break it, we must design solutions as interconnected as the lives they aim to transform. As you all know, global poverty is not just an economic problem. It's a moral and structural injustice. It stems from centuries of extraction, exclusion, and inequality that deny people the opportunity and agency they need. For hundreds of millions across the globe, poverty is not just a lack of money, it's a lack of opportunity, a lack of access to basic resources, and a sense of hopelessness. Traditional aid models, while well-intentioned, often fall short because they fail to address the root causes of poverty or empower individuals to become agents of their own change. They're often designed by people that live far too far from the problem. They may solve a short-term need, but they oftentimes don't lead to sustainable change. And if we want to reduce extreme poverty, we need to focus on sustainable change. So at Village Enterprise, we ask, within this complexity, where is the most just place to intervene? And our answer is to meet the individual where she is and design solutions that work for her lived reality. So how do we do it? Village Enterprise works household by household, equipping women, refugees, and young people living in extreme poverty to become entrepreneurs for the very first time. We begin with identifying the poorest households in a community. These are mostly women living below the extreme poverty line, struggling to meet their most basic needs. Women like Salome that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. We then provide a holistic support package. This includes a mobile cash transfer in the form of a grant, not a loan. This allows these first-time entrepreneurs to invest in their chosen business and reinvest their profits in their families and their businesses. But crucially, this grant is accompanied by comprehensive training. Our participants learn practical skills in financial literacy, market analysis, record keeping, business management, and best practices like regenerative agricultural practices. They're taught how to identify viable business opportunities in their local context, how to manage their income and expenses, how to plan for future growth, and how to diversify into an additional income generating activity. Beyond the initial training, we emphasize the power of peer support. Entrepreneurs are grouped into business savings groups, fostering a sense of community and collective responsibility. These groups provide a platform for sharing knowledge, offering mutual encouragement and engaging in collective savings, which can then be used to expand businesses or address unforeseen challenges. This group-based approach not only amplifies the impact of the training, but also builds social capital, a vital ingredient for long-term resilience. But perhaps the most impactful aspect of our model is the ongoing mentoring by a local business mentor. This is a photo of Salome in her field with a business mentor. And this business mentor is providing her with guidance and support. We provide this support for a full year. And these mentors are not just trainers, they're trusted advisors, helping our entrepreneurs navigate challenges, celebrate successes, and adapt their business strategies to the evolving market conditions. And this sustained engagement is critical. It transforms theoretical knowledge into the practical application and ensuring that our businesses have the best chance of success. In addition, we've been an early adopter of digital tools to support new entrepreneurs and AI-based tools that can provide mentoring and feedback. So where do we work? We work in rural areas of East and Central Africa. A couple of the countries that were mentioned in the last presentation, Ethiopia and Nigeria, but we also work throughout East and Central Africa, both in large and smaller countries. We work where poverty rates are extremely high, and in just 1 year, over 80% of the participants have lifted themselves and their families out of poverty. That's in 1 year, over 80% have lifted themselves and their families out of extreme poverty. Women like Salome, the refugee from South Sudan. When I met Salome in the Bidi Bidi refugee camp 5 years ago, she was a victim of a broken system. She had 6 children who depended on her, and her only worldly possessions were a small jug for water, a plastic wash basin, and the clothes on her back. 5 years later, she's a successful businesswoman running a retail and agricultural business. She was able to purchase 2 acres of land with income from her businesses. She provides not only for her 6 children, but also 5 other children who have lost their parents. They're all in school. And when I spoke with her, she told me that she feels hopeful for her future. She told me that no one can take away from her what she has learned. This isn't charity, it's justice through opportunity. So now let's talk about the evidence and why we know it works. Our approach, poverty graduation, was first pioneered by BRAC in the wake of the microfinance movement. And while microfinance had drastically changed the plight of the poor, access to microloans had failed to meaningfully reach and transform the lives of the extreme poor. It became clear that to truly move the needle for someone living in extreme poverty, we needed a model that would provide more holistic support. Now, graduation is among the most rigorously studied approaches in international development. The approach was first evaluated through a study commissioned by CGAP with funding from the Ford Foundation. And this multi-country research first demonstrated the promise of the approach back in 2015. That study, conducted across 10 countries, found that the graduation approach led to lasting improvements in income, savings, food security, and well-being. The results were so compelling that it became a model for how to help the poorest escape extreme poverty. Village Enterprises built on that foundation by adapting, simplifying, and cost-optimizing the model for rural Africa. Today, we've proven through 3 randomized control trials that our version delivers high impact and sustainable results at a fraction of the cost of the original approach. So 2 critical questions emerged from the CGAP Ford study. The first was, can it be done at scale? The problem of extreme poverty is so huge. In Africa, there are over 500 million people still living in extreme poverty. So to make a dent in that problem, it has to be done at scale. And the pilots in the CGAP Ford study were very small and heavily resourced. Researchers and policymakers wanted to know whether governments or NGOs could develop and deliver the graduation approach cost effectively and at scale without losing impact. The second question was, could it be made more cost efficient and locally adaptable? The original model was expensive and complex, and the question became how to simplify it, reducing costs, using local mentors, and leveraging technology while still achieving transformational results. And these are two questions that led to the next phase of innovation from organizations like Village Enterprise, who took up the challenge to prove that the graduation approach could be scaled affordably, adapted for African contexts where extreme poverty is the highest, and sustained through government systems and delivery. We launched a randomized control trial with Innovations for Poverty Action in 2013 that not only evaluated our model versus a control group, but also against a fully costed cash transfer arms. Cash transfer arms are one of the most scalable approaches, but we believed that we would see higher impact with our more holistic approach. And the results were very encouraging. Not only did our approach get better results than a cash transfer in increasing consumption, income, and assets, it also proves to be very cost-effective, leading to sustained increases in consumption, assets, and income, as well as improvements in nutrition and subjective well-being. Not only were the participants better off financially, they were eating more nutritious foods and reporting better mental health and a sense of well-being. So the next question is, could this scale and still get positive results? And to scale poverty graduation and ensure results, funders were interested in testing results-based funding mechanisms. And because of our positive RCT results, we were chosen to implement the first development impact bond in poverty alleviation in Africa. With outcome funding from USAID, FCDO, and a private foundation, as well as investors who provided the working capital, we equipped over 14,000 first-time entrepreneurs in Kenya and Uganda, and we evaluated the results with a randomized control trial. Independent evaluators from ID Insight conducted the RCT to evaluate the results and confirm that the program exceeded the targets that we set out to achieve, achieving a return on investment of $5.40 in increased household income for every dollar that was invested, one of the highest ROIs ever recorded by an RCT for a poverty alleviation program of its kind. So despite these positive results, we know that systemic barriers still hold our entrepreneurs back. They're working hard building small businesses, but too often they're faced with challenges that impede their progress. And the challenges that we're trying to address are around nutrition, climate resilience, access to markets and digital tools, and gender equity. Now that we know that poverty graduation works, we can layer in other solutions, nutrition programs, climate adaptation, market linkages, in ways that are more targeted, more cost-effective, and more sustainable. In short, graduation isn't the end point, it's the foundation on which integrated solutions can be layered, tested, and then scaled. I'd like to share with you just two case studies, one focused on nutrition and the other on building markets and linkages. In northern Kenya, child malnutrition rates are among the highest in the world. For years, traditional food security programs focused on emergency food aid and cash transfers. Through Nawiri, we focused on building households' capacity to generate income and savings. We integrated our graduation model with health and nutrition interventions. Families received short-term consumption support so they could meet their immediate food needs, And we worked closely with community health workers to manage cases in a more holistic way. Finally, we provided behavior change coaching on nutrition, kitchen gardens, and sanitation to support lasting health. One of the most exciting innovations was the use of our digital dashboards that made truly targeted support possible. We collected rich household data on both nutrition and business outcomes, and our business mentors worked with community health workers who used those dashboards and that information to identify families who were struggling and respond right away. Each household received tailored support at the moment they needed it most. The results were truly extraordinary. Families increased their income, diversified their diets, and sustained improvements in child malnutrition. Most importantly, acute child malnutrition dropped from 36% to just 4% in 1 year. The program worked because it was not just about food handouts. It provided immediate humanitarian assistance with a long-term solution that built self-reliance and climate resilience for the future. Now I'd like to speak about another systemic barrier, the challenges our entrepreneurs face in accessing viable markets. In refugee settlements, traditional humanitarian aid is focused mainly on short-term needs. I mentioned earlier what was provided to the refugees when they arrived in the Bidi Bidi refugee camp. In our case, we are working to change that equation. We launched a program called Dreams, which combined our poverty graduation approach with Mercy Corps' market systems development work, enabling refugees to build small enterprises and connect to real markets for poultry, sesame seeds, groundnuts, and other income-generating crops. To make sure our first-time entrepreneurs can continue to access markets after we exit, we have introduced digital tools and trained them to use these tools effectively. We have a randomized control trial going on to evaluate the results of this Dreams approach, and our preliminary RCT results show significant increases in business income and household savings and assets, even greater than our previous RCTs. This demonstrates the power of connecting entrepreneurs to external markets and building genuine self-reliance among refugee households. As Nelson Mandela reminded us, this is not charity, it is justice. Recognizing that refugees as economic actors are capable of rebuilding their own lives and strengthening local economies. The success of Nawiri and Dreams showed us what is possible when people are empowered to build successful businesses and connect to real markets. But to create lasting, large-scale change, we need to move beyond individual program to systems that reach millions. That type of scale requires government partnerships. And Village Enterprise now serves as a technical assistance providers to the governments of Kenya, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Uganda, helping the governments embed this graduation approach into their national social protection systems. In Kenya, we're working with the government of Kenya and the World Bank on the Kenya Social and Economic Inclusion Project, a $127 million initiative to scale the model nationwide to 12 million Kenyans. In Rwanda, we're partnering with the government to implement the national graduation strategy that the government has put in place. And already over 100,000 people have lifted themselves out of extreme poverty in just 2 years. It's the goal of the Rwandan government, as well as Village Enterprises, to reach 4 million Rwandans and end extreme poverty by 2030. Similar collaborations are now emerging in Ethiopia and Uganda. This marks a true paradigm shift from NGO-led projects in humanitarian aid to government-owned systems change. It's only through governments that we can address extreme poverty at the scale needed to end hunger and human suffering. At Village Enterprise, we've set an ambitious goal to lift 20 million people in Africa out of extreme poverty by 2030. Together with governments, funders, and communities, we believe that we can make that vision a reality. So I believe we're here today because we all want a more just and peaceful world. And I hope we can all agree that we need to look beyond just economic growth and address poverty in all its dimensions and do so at scale. I hope I've made the case that justice begins in the household and that lasting solutions to poverty, hunger, climate vulnerability, and inequality must focus on building long-term sustainability at the household level. Ending extreme poverty and achieving global justice is not an impossible dream. It's an achievable goal when we invest in approaches that are backed by evidence, grounded in justice, driven by communities, and focused on building self-reliance and resilience. And I'd like to open it to questions that you might have.
Hey, many thanks, Dianne. And there is no question as yet in the chat and no raised hands, so I will start us off, but I have to make a fair disclosure that I'm a great fan of Village Enterprise and so heavily biased in your favor. But let me ask you this question, the question of externalities. So you talk about randomized controlled trials, and you have relied on them quite a bit to provide evidence of what you have achieved with your programs. And the way I understand them, they work by comparing what happens in a target area, in sort of the treatment area, if you like, versus an untreated area, an area where you're not operating. And of course, you use comparable areas to compare your area with. Now, what that leaves out potentially, somebody might say, is externalities that might be both positive and negative. So it could be that there's spillover effects that are from the area that is your treatment area, so to speak, to neighboring areas. They would not be captured in the randomized control trial area. And as I said, they could be positive and negative. Positive would be ordinary multiplier effects, where because let's say the village in which you're operating becomes better off, they buy more stuff from neighboring villages and so on. Negative externalities would be that your village, because people are better educated, better able to function, better able to trade, they are better able to compete with neighboring villages and are then potentially outcompeting other villages, so that gains in the village in which you operate lead to deteriorations in neighboring villages. So I just wanted to ask you, have you thought about this? Is this part of what you are examining when you do these randomized control trials, or is that something that you simply ignore?
No, I think, I'm not the person that's designing the randomized control. We work with experts, both academics and research institutions that specialize in designing the randomized control trials to try to minimize those externalities. So in the case of two of our RCTs, we work with Innovations for Poverty Action and academic PIs on both of those projects. And it's their job as they're designing the study and how it gets implemented to try to limit those externalities by enough of a distance between the villages and the control group villages and the village enterprise villages, but also ensuring that we work in an area that's large enough that there isn't a big difference potentially in the starting point of those two villages. So we're trying to, make sure that the villages are similar in terms of, the levels of extreme poverty, but you minimize the externalities by having enough distance between those two villages. But obviously you can't completely eliminate those externalities. That's, somewhat of a limit of any evaluation. but the study designers are trying to do their best to build a study that will limit those. All of our studies were what they call large-scale randomized control trials. So, multiple treatment groups and control groups across a fairly significant area.
Yeah, I was not so much thinking of spillover effects from the treatment area to the control group, but rather to third areas, which might be in close proximity to the treatment area, so to speak, where you might get these effects of either competition or multiplier or something of that sort.
Well, we're about to launch a new RCT that will hopefully look at that, the spillover effect. We haven't done an RCT to actually look at spillover effect yet, but this next RCT that we're launching in Ethiopia, the study design is actually specifically going to try to capture that.
So let me get to another clearly positive externality, and that is that, of course, you provide a model, and because the model is evidence-based, you can raise funding and also political enthusiasm for your approach. And that is a very big benefit that goes beyond what you're doing locally in the particular initiative that you take. And there I wanted to ask you what your experience has been in working with these political units, governments and government agencies, right? We had earlier heard that some of these governments are pretty corrupt, that they are often in it for themselves, trying to benefit their own clan, family, ethnic group, and not particularly democratic, not particularly sensitive to the needs of the poorest members of society. And these are things that I'm sure you have encountered in your work. And my question is, can you speak a little bit about that? How have you found governments? Are you trying to work on them? Is it an uphill battle to get them involved and get them to be enthusiastic? Do you select countries in part on the basis of how responsive they are to your approach, how willing they are to collaborate with you, and basically say that countries that are not receptive are just ones where I'm not going to invest a lot of energy. I'm going to concentrate on those countries where I have sympathetic and supportive political leadership? Or how does it work? What's been your experience there?
That's a great question. Village Enterprise was working in Kenya and Uganda when I started 15 years ago. And so that was kind of historical. That's where the organization got started, in part because English is widely spoken. The organization was started in the Silicon Valley and the San Francisco Bay Area with this entrepreneurship-driven model. And what the organization has done over the years since I've been at the organization is really grow in Africa. So the organization is now 98% African. And when we started to choose countries for expansion, we were interested in countries where there was government that we felt would be receptive to what we were hoping to do, which is to scale our model through governments. And so our next country of expansion was Rwanda. And we went into Rwanda in part because Rwanda had already started working on a national graduation strategy. So there was already this interest in potentially putting in place the structure and even the budgets, the internal budgets for this type of approach. They had already implemented cash transfers in Rwanda, and they were hoping to layer on top of that cash transfer program interventions like Village Enterprises intervention. And we also went into Rwanda because the government was very data-driven, and we had just finished our development impact bond, and the government was very interested in the fact that we actually had evidence for the model using a results-based funding mechanism. And so we definitely have chosen countries for expansion based on receptiveness of the government. Ethiopia has a program called PSMP that's World Bank funded. So similarly, an interest in this type of model and a receptiveness to working with nonprofits like Village Enterprise to help them build the capacity, both to scale the model through their own structures, but also to build the monitoring and evaluation systems that are needed to ensure that this type of program has impact at scale. And by building those systems, you don't eliminate corruption, but you do, to some extent, minimize corruption. If there's a good way to track the cash transfers that go out, the training that occurs, the income and savings increases that occur as a result of the program, you're less likely to have corruption because you have these ways of measuring what's actually happening on the ground. So we're, in the case of when we work with governments, we're not only training their people to deliver the model based on the success that we've had, we're also helping the governments build similar systems to the systems that we use to monitor and evaluate both the progress of the entrepreneurs through the program, but then also the results at the end of the program. In terms of corruption, we definitely have experienced challenges, but I would say oftentimes there's this sense that African governments are a lot more corrupt than other governments, and I don't necessarily know if that's true. And I think that what we see is the African governments that we're working with are truly interested in this type of program to help lift the bottom, half of their population out of extreme poverty. And if you looked at the examples that were given earlier about China, one of the reasons that China has been successful is that they were successful at lifting the people at the very bottom out of extreme poverty. And if you saw the return on investment numbers, for every dollar that a government invests in this kind of program, they can expect to see $5 to $6 in income generated by the entrepreneurs that they're helping get started.
Yeah, and it's of course a tremendous talent pool that goes to waste if people
exactly
are poor, are not educated, are falling behind in terms of physical and mental health and so on and so forth. But can you, before we get to Carol, can you maybe just say a little bit more about how that collaboration with governments works? Is it that you pool resources and work on a larger scale, or is it that you help them set up their own projects, which are then not funded by you without commingling of funds? But basically you say, okay, here is the model, we show you how to do it, we do it for you in a particular area of your country, and now we are willing to help you do it somewhere else at a larger scale, perhaps with your own money.
Yeah, so it's not like it works the same in every country, but generally speaking, what we've found has been successful is that we launch a pilot. So where we actually demonstrate the impact, and the Development Impact Bond was one of those pilots where in Kenya and Uganda, we launched this pilot. And through that pilot, we demonstrated that in both Kenya and Uganda, we would have this significant impact and could get paid based on the results from implementing that. And then based on the pilots that we launch in the various countries, we bring government out to see those pilots and to see the success of those pilots. And we share the data with the governments. And then we get governments interested and we start partnering with the governments. And it's looked different I'll give you examples from Rwanda and Kenya. In Rwanda, we won the largest grant from USA Development Innovation Ventures in a decade to work with the Rwandan government on a results-based, milestone-based project to get the government sort of equipped to deliver the model, to build the information system to monitor and evaluate the model, and to build the policies that are necessary for ongoing budget support of the implementation going forward. And in that case, about halfway through the project, USAID funding disappeared. And so now what we're finding is, one, we were able to raise money from private investors. There's enough interest in this project that private investors came in to fill the gap, so that we could get the project to the place where the Rwandan government is fully implementing and resourcing with their own budgets the project. So that's the Rwandan government. In the case of the Kenya government, we were part of what was called the pilot for KSIP, which I mentioned is this large $127 million World Bank funded project now. And that pilot went really well. There was an RCT associated with that. The pilot went really well. And now they're entering phase 2, where the World Bank is funding the Kenya government to scale this model nationwide. And Village Enterprise is working as a technical assistance provider on that. So really what I see is the long-term path to scale for governments is, there's a combination of World Bank funding, but then also funding out of their own budgets, that governments themselves will see the value of this model in providing economic growth and lifting people out of extreme poverty. And like you said, making sure that we're taking advantage of all the human potential that is in a country, right? If someone's living in extreme poverty and doesn't have access to resources, they can't be a productive member of the economy. What we do is we make it so that people can be productive members of these economies, and ultimately governments recognize that value, and so they're actually allocating in their own budgets money to this approach. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. And in your answer, you used the word investors. And I just wanted to ask you, what investors are those? Are those people who donate, or are these people who are expecting a return on their investment?
So in the case of the Development Impact Bond, the outcome funders, USAID, FCDO, and this private foundation, were willing to pay a return to the investors, because the investors were providing the upfront working capital, which was a significant risk, right? They risked essentially losing all their money if we just didn't perform at all, and it was there was a sliding scale in terms of how much money they would get back in the return. But in the case of the Development Impact Bond, we had to raise that working capital because the outcome funders were not going to pay us until a year after the program ended, when the RCT results came in. And that was the reason for having investors at the onset of the project. And in social impact bonds, development impact bonds, that's what happens. You raise money from investors up front. It doesn't necessarily have to be there doesn't necessarily have to be a financial return. Sometimes investors are willing to just get their money back and not get a return. So it's not necessarily always the case that the investors require a return. We were trying to set this up so that it could potentially scale. And so we felt that a return to the investors was more likely to be a scalable model to attract new capital to this type of approach.
Yeah. Very creative. Carol.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. Very, very interesting. Well, I have a question. Actually, it is already partially answered, but because you showed us the map of countries involved in Africa. So my first question was how countries have been chosen, but you already provided some elements. If I'm not mistaken, I didn't see West Africa countries. I don't know if this is related also to the language, because they are basically French-speaking countries, not all of them, but many of them. So I would like to know if also the language can be a factor when selecting countries. And you also mentioned that it's the projects that you carry out are multi-stakeholders. So I was really thinking of how you can find a balance between different priorities, because I think that many times, very often, there might be also differences when it comes to government, local nonprofits, community stakeholders. They might have different priorities. And the third point are like community stakeholders. Do they have any skepticism? Are they reluctant when it comes to these new, let's say, innovative steps and approaches? Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a lot of questions. So the first question is around why we work where we work. And as I mentioned, we started in Kenya and Uganda. And we're a relatively small nonprofit, even though we've done multiple randomized controlled trials and are working with governments. We're still a relatively small nonprofit. And so what we've chosen to do is to go deeper in the countries that we currently operate in. So we work with with people on the ground. We have about a little over 400 people in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Ethiopia. And then we work in partnership in other countries. And we go into other countries in partnership based on requests that come to us. So in the case, we are in West Africa and Nigeria. We just launched in Nigeria. And in that case, the Gates Foundation came to us and asked us to work with the Kaduna state government in Nigeria, because there was a project that they had funded, and they felt that we could add value to that project in helping the Kaduna state implement this poverty graduation type of approach. And in other West African countries, language is an issue. I mean, there is no doubt that language plays a role in how effective you can be. That doesn't mean we wouldn't go into a West African country just based on language. But right now, given how much work we have to do and the size of the organization, we're not looking to expand in West Africa. We'd have to really grow the size of our budget and be asked by either the World Bank or a large funder to move into a West African country for that to make sense. So that's the answer to your first question. The second is around multi-stakeholders, and that's a really good point, that whenever you're working on government partnerships, you do have a lot of different stakeholders. And in order for the project to be successful, everyone has to have a common view of what success looks like. What are we trying to achieve together? And one of the things that we do when we work with governments is we really co-create with governments. We're not coming in and dictating this is the way it needs to be. We have evidence for this model, and we know what works and what doesn't work, but we also understand that government have their existing systems and that we have to work within those existing systems. And so how we work in Rwanda is different from how we work in Kenya. And even within a country as big as Kenya, we may work differently at the national level than how we work at the local level. So in Kenya, we're working with funding from the World Bank at the national level, but we're also working with funding from the Gates Foundation at the county level. And so what we try to be is just a really good partner to governments. And we also have a lot of experience and partnerships with other NGOs, because oftentimes, in order to deliver these programs at scale, we need to help local NGOs that are part of the government system. We need to equip them, not just government officials, but also local NGOs. And so we do a lot of convening and, having everyone kind of develop this shared view of what success looks like and how to get there. So the framework of how to implement and what components we're going to be delivering and what sequence and how long the program is going to last. A lot of those questions we try to stay open to the government and government's ideas on what they'd like to see happen. And then the third question is, I'm curious, the skepticism, who are you interested in terms of the skeptics? What stakeholder are you most interested in hearing about?
Like the rural farmers, or yes, people working in rural, people living in rural settings.
Okay, so the participants, the people that we work with is the ones
Exactly,
I'm wondering
yes.
about. Yeah, so I think one of the beauties of the village enterprise model is that it is a community-based approach. So when we go into a community, the first thing, first of all, the people that go into the community are local staff. So, it's our Kenyan team that goes into a rural village, and they go through a process to identify what we consider like people that will be high-performing business mentors. And those are people that are from the local community. They speak the local language. They usually have like a set of skills that maybe the people that we're going to work with, people living in extreme poverty, might not have, but they're part of that same community, that same village. And by doing it that way, we get immediate buy-in from the community. Another reason we don't have a lot of skepticism is we don't cherry pick who's going to be the best entrepreneur. We'll work with anyone that qualifies, and qualifies means they live in extreme poverty. That's what you need to qualify for our program. And then the other thing is that we provide this package of support. And so in order to participate in the program, it really is just a matter of saying, yes, I'm willing to, go through this training. I'm willing to be part of this program for 1 year. So there's very little skepticism in the case of, the people that we're working with. These are people oftentimes have very low levels of literacy, have not had the opportunity to go through even primary school in many cases. And so this is just a huge opportunity for them to learn, to build their social capital, and to be part of something that's really going to transform the lives of not only themselves, but their family members. And it really is amazing to see what can happen in just 1 year. So there's very little skepticism from the participants. Occasionally when we first come in and our, staff are talking to the, like, you're going to give cash transfers, there's a little bit of like, what's behind this? But we usually get around that pretty quickly just because we have local people.
Thank you very much. That's
Thank you.
amazing. That's really a lot of work. Thank you.
Hi. So I have a question.
Yes.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. It was amazing, and it's crazy to see the amount of work you've done and how much you have accomplished. And yeah, so I come from manufacturing, and I was just wondering, what is the scope for advancing manufacturing and industry in, say, in Africa or in the global South? Because I've been in some recent events that regarding international development, and much of the work was in WASH, so sanitation, water, and then like you showed some projects in poultry. And I was just wondering, is there a need for development or in advancing manufacturing or industrialization sustainably? That's one question. And the second question is, when I looked at some of the work you've done, so someone like me, like an individual academic, it feels intimidating. Like, what can we do as a single person? And so what would be your advice to a random academic or someone in university or who wants to progress on to maybe do a social enterprise? What would be your advice? How can we approach this international development?
In terms of your first question, it's, I definitely believe that, manufacturing is going to be one of the key drivers of economic growth in Africa. There have been some real setbacks with what's going on with tariffs and that sort of thing, but it's definitely a major component of economic growth. Village Enterprise is not focused on that particular economic component of growth. So we're working exclusively in the rural areas where the vast majority of the extreme poor live. So our focus is on the extreme poor. And in the case of Africa, it's still a significant percentage of the people. And because of population growth, it's growing. So the percentage has gone down. There's some real progress that's been made, but because the population is growing, the number is going up. And so we're really focused on that, 500 million people that are still living in extreme poverty in these rural areas. And what we're trying to do is give them the opportunity to be an entrepreneur. And so what we allow is them to start any type of business they want to start. And so, we see them start agricultural businesses. So they're transitioning from subsistence farming to income generating crops, income generating livestock. They're running those farms differently with the knowledge that they gain from our program. And they're implementing best practices that they didn't before, because they're actually looking at it as an income generating activity. But we also start all different types of businesses, retail businesses, skilled labor businesses like tailoring, carpentry. We start, businesses that are meeting local needs like cell phone charging stations, because not everyone has electricity in the house. So just like anywhere in the world, if you allow people to become entrepreneurs, the creativity that they bring to that is really astounding. And so what we see is that regardless of like geography and regardless of kind of the mix of businesses that people are starting, our program consistently delivers after just 1 year a significant impact. Over 80% of people have lifted themselves out of extreme poverty. That's huge. And then there are significant gains across multiple variables, the income, the assets, and the savings, those financial variables, but also things like nutrition. So if people are well nourished, they're going to be more productive, right? The people themselves that are running the businesses, but also their children who are in school, who are going to be more productive long-term because they were well nourished as children. And then things like subjective well-being, I think sometimes we underestimate the importance of how people feel. So if you wake up in the morning and you feel hopeless, you're less likely to be productive than if you wake up in the morning and you feel optimistic about your future, right? And so, I think those are those factors that we see. And then what was the second part of your question? You had a second part of your question. What can you do?
Yes.
What can you do? I remember. I think what any individual can do really depends on where their passion lies. I feel like, if you want to make a difference in the world, you have to decide what you want your purpose to be and where your passion lies. And it varies from individual to individual. So I can't give like a specific advice that one size fits all. I think if you're someone who's entrepreneurial and you have a great idea that could make a difference in the world, then yeah, I think pursuing social entrepreneurship is a great way to have outsized impact. But I think academics make a huge difference too. I mean, I think about our partners on our randomized control trials. The academics that have partnered with us have helped us build the evidence so that this model can go to scale. And so I think academics in that kind of research setting can play a huge role in making a difference. I just think it really depends on what drives you and what you're interested in doing with your life.
Yeah. It just feels intimidating when you look at the scale of what can be done, and then when you look at you alone or how much you can actually accomplish, but let it be research or moving beyond that. Because like if you see engineering projects like Engineering Without Borders, there are students, they say, you know what, you have to look at the social side, and then you do a small project, and then you move on and enter industry. So that's the general pattern of how engineers, let's say, at least
Yeah.
are functioning. And yeah, I feel it's still lacking of how engineers can enter international development, let's say,
I think there are a lot of opportunities right now, in particular, so one of the things that I didn't get into a lot of detail, but Village Enterprise is working on a digital platform for our micro entrepreneurs. Because if you think about it, everybody in the world, for the most part, runs their businesses with digital tools now. Most entrepreneurs have a smartphone, most entrepreneurs even have a computer, and they're running their business with these digital tools. And so the entrepreneurs that we work with are at a huge disadvantage. It's like a competitive advantage to have access to digital tools. And so what we believe that is going to be essential if we really want to have outsized impact at scale is a digital platform that we can provide our micro entrepreneurs that they can actually use. And AI is now making that possible because you can translate from all these different languages that our entrepreneurs speak hundreds of languages, and AI is making translation possible so that can be voice activated. So if you have low literacy levels, you can actually use a digital platform. For the first time, this is possible. And so we have some engineers that are providing pro bono support to this project. And I mean, that's just one example, but I feel like if you're passionate about something and you're willing to commit to the long run, there are ways to make a huge difference. You can't make a difference in just a few months. I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years. And so like, if you really want to make an impact, I think you just have to be committed to like, what is it you're trying to achieve? And then just stay committed to it for a while in order to have impact.
Yeah.
And
thank you so much.
to collaborate,
Yes.
Don't always ask, what can I do alone as a small potato? Ask yourself, how can I combine with other small potatoes to create something larger, right? The whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Absolutely.
We want to thank you very much, Dianne. This was very inspiring and a wonderful hour spent together and learning about your project. And as you know, I've been a big fan and supporter for quite a while. And so thank you very much for coming and inspiring us like that.